Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host Didi. Joining me, as always, is Vedant. And for the first time ever at Motorsport Baithak, we have a special guest joining us for this week's podcast. It is my honor to welcome Kunal Shah. For those who may not be as familiar with his work, Kunal has over 15 years of experience in various roles across the sports industry, including but not limited to marketing, public relations, sponsorship acquisition and activation, and talent management. He worked for over 5 years with the Force India Formula One team between 2010 and 2015 as the general manager of marketing and sponsorships, and as the director of the team's driver academy, during which he launched the One from a Billion Hunt, a pan India driver training program that unearthed and developed the racing talents of Jehan Darula and Arjun Mani. He also consults with Viasport on their F1 broadcast and content, while also managing their relationship with motorsport teams, drivers, circuits, and other stakeholders. He has been an F1 columnist for various media houses for over a decade, writes his own Formula One blog, which was rated as one of the top 25 sports blogs to read, and co hosts the Inside Line F1 podcast. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Kunal about F1, the state of motorsport in India, and his journey in the motorsport industry. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our questions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello and welcome to the show, Kunal. It is an absolute privilege to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I can't wait to hear your insights into the world of motorsport. But before we get into anything important, I have to ask you: have you recovered from the Abu Dhabi fiasco, and are you ready for the 2022 season?
Well, I don't think everyone's going to recover from Abu Dhabi until and unless we actually know what the FIA, makes public of their investigation. And it's a bit of a farce that, it's become a Mercedes versus FIA or Hamilton versus FIA, given the whole timing of when the FIA wants to come up publicly with their release and so on. But yeah, frankly, I wish it was handled better. Am I ready to look forward to 2022? Yes, I think so. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have the first 2022 cars unveiled and so on, and it's going to be a fun new era for Formula One, a much awaited new era for Formula One, I would say.
Yep, absolutely. We are also looking forward to the months to come. And in our opinion, I think the next 12 months are going to be the most exciting months for motorsport. F1 and otherwise. But I think one question that has been on everyone's mind is, is Lewis Hamilton coming back to Formula One in 2022? And if you could shed some light on that, what Lewis Hamilton might be going through. I think we all could benefit from understanding. Um, how this particular event has really affected a seven-time world champion who's been in the sport for over a decade now.
So frankly, I stand with Zach Brown when he says he wouldn't be surprised if Lewis Hamilton walks away. And the reason is more than racing, I would say. The reason is more about integrity. The reason is more about fairness. And what is the fairness that we're talking about here? It's about the fact that there were certain decisions that were made in Abu Dhabi, which we all know now, and they've been dissected by pretty much every pundit, every columnist, every broadcaster, and so on. So I'm not going to sort of dissect into that again. But the big question here is, is Formula One or was Formula One fair? Will they continue to be fair? And unfortunately, given the whole Hamilton Mercedes juggernaut that we've seen, where they won pretty much everything that was there to win in the hybrid turbo era, or the first part of the hybrid turbo era, 2014 onwards, some people are just happy to have a new winner. But hey, is that really how you want to crown a new winner? Should that be the way Formula One crowns new winners in the time to come? And if that's what one believes is the case, then 2021 it was Hamilton who was not given his eighth title, if that's the word I may use. Could it be in 23 Verstappen is denied his title? Hey, you won two titles back to back. Let somebody else win. And then we are sort of moving towards calling it entertainment, and then I'd rather be watching Big Boss or something else, where than end up watching watching Formula One. So that those ethos is what the big question is. And I was explaining this to someone just a couple of days ago in person, and why what Michael Massey did in my mind was not right was because he operated out of a framework which Formula One has never operated in. And I actually gave a very simple example, which I'm going to repeat here because, at least in my view, it seems like, a good example, right? So let's assume, Didi, you've got a car and you have, you have a button on the car key which you press and the car doors unlock. So you press the button, doors unlock, you open the door, you sit in the car, you put the ignition key inside, you crank it up, and then the car starts, right? So that is a framework you have evolved ever since you got your driver's license, or even before that, because hey, to do that you didn't really need a license. You could
Yeah.
just do that with, whoever was willing to let you do that. Now imagine this: you go and stand in front of your car, right? You press the unlock button on the keychain, and the car ignites, and suddenly you're like, okay, wow, the car's not supposed to do that. And that's sort of what happened, that the framework of application of rules went a little awry, and then suddenly it's like, hey, but guys, when last did we do this? When last did this happen? And there is no precedent of that. So yes, I think I said I was over Abu Dhabi, but clearly my answers prove that I'm not. So if there is any psychiatrist or psychologist listening in, yes, I'm probably not over Abu Dhabi right now as well.
Yeah, and I think we all we all are trying, but we keep going back to that conversation, I guess. But the obvious next question would be, how do you propose that FIA resolve this issue of inconsistency in the application of sporting and technical regulations? Now, obviously, we saw that throughout the course of the season. Arguably, you can say that the FIA applied the rules inconsistently to bring the championship closer, and then used that same inconsistency to decide the championship at Abu Dhabi. And Michael Massey has been under fire since that incident. So, what is your proposal? Because I think part of that is will also determine whether or not Lewis Hamilton is back in 2022.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. What will it take for Hamilton to be back in 2022? And it's one thing to remember that, yes, the FIA will make public their investigations on the 18th of March, which is the first free practice session of the 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix, the first Grand Prix of the season. But I wouldn't be surprised if the teams and drivers already know what's going to be made public. So for people thinking that now it's the FIA holding Lewis Hamilton ransom, with their findings about making a commitment to 2022 and so on, I don't necessarily think they're going to do that. So there's going to be a public facing of things, and there's going to be a private facing of things, and of course we'll never know what eventually happens in the private facing of things. So that's one way of sort of just looking at the timeline, right? How can the FIA be more consistent? Now, that's $1 million question. If there was Naval Ravikant or Balaji Srinivasan on this podcast, they'll say, let's bring in machine learning and AI, and let's build some blockchain technology and something. And I have no idea of these things, okay, I must admit, so that we get more consistent, more within the frameworks of what we've seen or what we expect. But the truth is, I would say that they will look at doing two things. The first thing is they will empower Michael Massey a little more, and they will sort of strengthen his team that much more. So they will sort of shield him from the team bosses, which is what they should anyway do, but they will give him more support in his decision making, because one needs to understand that Michael Massey is just the public face of race control, as we call it. But there are wise old men and women who actually sit and advise him on what's happening, much like what we see, when the FI shows the FI, or F1 shows the FI cam, and there are lots of race directors sitting there and sort of doing their thing. So that's race control, and they will strengthen the race control team by giving Massey more support. I don't think they will let go of Massey, because if they let go of Massey from his role, it's one way of the FI saying, "Hey, we made a mistake," and then if they go down that road, it'll then become that if you made a mistake, can you overturn the decisions? And of course, you can't go back in time and do things. And one of the other things they must consider, and I know there's pros and cons to this as well, is can they have more permanent driver stewards, all right? And instead of having a pool of driver stewards to bank in from each time, can a permanent driver stewards just travel everywhere? And that may not necessarily be a very wise idea as well. I mean, it's just that because the current approach is not working, let's try the opposite approach of that and see if that works, right? But that may not be the best way to approach this as well, because hey, what happens is, could human biases then come in? right? Like like there have, if somebody's a Dutch and suddenly the Dutch steward votes against or for Max, you could read into these things and so on. Much like the sport of cricket, they try and have neutral umpires and so on. So yes, lots of things for the FI to consider. And you mentioned sporting, you mentioned technical, and I can also turn around and say that, at the end of the day, the 2021 Formula One season challenged Formula One on several grounds. We just spoke about sporting regulations, especially when it came to wheel battles. And, given that everyone watches Formula One for wheel to wheel battles, that's one part of the regulations we have to get correct. The other sporting regulation, which sort of will get corrected in due course, is what happened in Spa. You could have two races under a safety car, call it a race, award half points. So fans don't have to get refunds and various other contractual clauses that sort of safeguard people. And then of course technical clauses as well that will, so yeah, technical challenges, whether it was flexi wings, whether it was pit stops, whether it was DRS infringements and so on. So eventually, I think Formula One will come out to be a stronger sport once it tides over all the shortcomings it had in 2021, I would say.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, yeah,
mean,
that
definitely from Formula One has a lot to do over the winter and before the. I mean, even during 2022, because all these changes won't come in overnight, I guess. But Lewis, like talking about Lewis Hamilton one last time, if Lewis Hamilton leaves Formula One at the end and does not come back in 2022, he's like Formula One won't just lose its most successful driver, but also one of the greatest icons in Formula One history. So, I mean, for, F1 needs Lewis Hamilton in the car next season. So, I mean, from what you can understand, what you can tell us, how much does Formula One need him? And how will they make sure he stays?
The making sure he stays is all about showing that, hey, we are still fair. What we did in Abu Dhabi was entirely fair, although there can be question marks on that. And hey, how we these are the changes we're bringing in to make sure that even that 1% of doubt or 0.1% of doubt about fairness never comes up again. So that's one way of sort of, it's like it's like a failed relationship. It's you want to try to reconcile, and you're saying, hey, I was a bad boy or a bad girl, and these are the things I won't do, and trust me, and so on. So it's going to be about trust building again, because I think one of the things that Lewis has done, and I think people are wrong in interpreting him as a drama queen or a crybaby and whatever. I don't think especially in 2021, I don't think it was that. I would say that I would say that if any driver was done this, I would expect similar behavior from such a driver, be it Lewis, be it Max, be it whoever. I mean, I fail to think what Max would have done if this would have happened to him. What Red Bull would have done, what Christian Horner would have done. Of course, I'm glad it's what's happened has happened. So that's one thing about, how do they make sure Lewis stays? And of course, they need Lewis to stay in Formula One. If he leaves, he will, whether he says it or not, it will be known he left because something wrong was done to him while he was going to win his eighth title, right? And that will bring about a lot of question mark into, the is Formula One a sport? Is it an entertainment? Are races fixed? And we've seen races being fixed before. So Liberty Media, while spending so much time, energy, effort, money on marketing the sport, you know it's like they'll keep marketing the sport as they can, but if people do not believe in the product, then you can only do so much more as marketing, right? So they need to do what it takes to make sure Lewis Hamilton stays in Formula One. But of course, I'm also in this stage where I'm like, hey, let's have some fun. Let's make sure, or let's assume Lewis is not going to race. Then I want to see how Mercedes ends up fixing the Lewis Hamilton not racing for a season problem as well. He might say, I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm emotionally disturbed with what happened. And why not? And they're saying, could Esteban Ocon get into the Mercedes car? Some people, of course, are hoping that it's a German driver by the name of Sebastian Vettel who gets to race in Mercedes. But or could it be the super sub Nico Hulkenberg? So who knows? Yeah, of course. I'm just the last part about Mercedes finding a replacement for Lewis seems a very, very low probability, I would say. I think Mercedes and Daimler and Formula One, FIA, they will all do what it takes to get Lewis.
I mean, yeah, Lewis is not just an F1 driver. He transcends F1, and like Vedant put it, he's an icon, not just of the sport, but by himself, he's a brand. And talking about sporting rules and regulations, technical rules and regulations, they're going to be in much more scrutiny next year with the new rules and regulations and all the teams trying to find loopholes and things like that. But let's get the conversation back to the entertainment purpose that you talked about, right? And something that Liberty Media has done really well over the last 3-4 years. Ever since they came into F1, they have really grown the audience through by increasing the entertainment value proposition for them. But at the same time, there are things that Liberty Media has done that has been under scrutiny, and people haven't been on board with all of it. And one of those things has been sprint races. Going into the 2022 season, we were told that there'll be 6 sprint races, but over the last couple of weeks, we have heard news that rumors coming from the paddock that F1 might have to scrap the sprint races because the teams might not be on board with the plan. What have your thoughts been on the sprint races, and how do you look at it?
So, personally speaking, I would say that, the sprint races, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes when I read read statements like we surveyed fans and they said sprint races were great. I wonder who are these fans that you surveyed? Can I speak to at least a
Same.
couple of them? You know, so the truth is that at the end of the day, uh, I would rather say let's take a step back. Liberty Media are trying different formats, trying different methods to make every single day of the weekend interesting, to get in more people to watch, Formula One racing. And if sprint races is one way of doing that, then I think that's pretty fantastic. Should some parts of sprint races change? I would say they should, especially this whole thing about the pole sitter, the fastest driver, not necessarily being the one who starts on pole position. That's something that should stay. And frankly, I'll put it this way. Formula One, the most fun thing is always the start and the opening laps, right? If we are going to get it twice on a Grand Prix weekend, I'm definitely not going to be the one complaining, right? But yes, it seems a bit of an odd fit because we've been watching, the sport for so long. We are so used to a very regimented format that the slightest bit of change here and there, and suddenly we're like, oh no, 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 this is not the DNA of Formula One I grew up with. So that said, I'm pretty happy to see what other experiments they sort of bring up, so long as it's not reverse grids.
Yeah, I think we're in sort of the similar boat. I think we're not as much against reverse grids here between Vedant and I, but we're in the similar boat that we'd still like to see Liberty Media experiment. The teams, I guess they're the ones who decide, but we'd like to see teams and F1 experiment with the format a little bit. And it's good to see them doing this. Hopefully, even if the sprint races don't go forward, we'll see another format come in for a trial phase that may or may not be successful. But talking about Liberty Media once again, I think the biggest pain point has been not for the audience maybe, but the elongation of the race calendar while simultaneously imposing a budget cap on the sport. And that has been something that the team personnel have struggled with. We have had interviews by motorsport.com. They interviewed, I think, a mechanic from a race team, who came out and said that, our resources are dwindling, not just financially, but the mental health resources of the team and the way they manage our time. It's become really difficult to keep up with this long calendar. And I believe that will, also translate into the way the engineers are functioning after a few years, because as, the development battle gets more and more intense. So what are your thoughts on that?
That was a very interesting piece of journalism, I would say, because the truth is that every time I speak to engineers and I speak to people in the paddock, they are just like what do we do? We just have to go ahead with whatever they plan. And of course, the plan is still to add two more races, make it 25 races in a season. And personally, when I sit through some of the press conferences and media sessions, you can see that towards the end of the triple header, there are people who are just like, God, can you just get over and done with this? Like, I'm tired, or especially when you're, juggling time zones and everything else together. So I think the cost of human capital can never be and should never be underestimated by Formula One. Uh, I believe Liberty Media will work with the teams again to try and find solutions to this. And could there be, right now a lot of dependencies are, Formula One's a very people dependent uh, sport. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there is just a Lewis Hamilton who can do what a Lewis Hamilton does, right? Similarly, there are people who, within the team operations, who are highly specialized in what they do. Could that be a split that you do as well? You of course have team A and team B, and they are alternating between races, and you of course choose where you go to and so on. And then there are, drivers, sorry, there are team principals like Toto Wolff who are talking of the cost of human capital, whereas there are team principals like Franz Tost saying if you don't like to work the work environment in Formula One, you're happy to leave. So I personally believe that's not the way to go, because it is the human talent that eventually makes Formula One what it is. It is the humans who design, who build these machines, who keep them in proper shape. And then it is, of course, the humans who sit and drive those machines at those supersonic speeds as well. So, in the time to come, I have a feeling that Formula One will figure a way to help human capital cope with such a strenuous calendar as well. And in fact, from this season as well, they are looking at changes to come in from, by reducing one whole day, at a Grand Prix weekend, which sort of makes it 23 days over the course of the season. And then, of course, when you consider that Monaco goes back into a Friday, Saturday, Sunday format, it becomes 24 days. And when people might be like, yeah, it's just a day per race. But the truth is, 24 days is literally almost a month after a point. So you get that couple of extra days at home and so on and so forth. So I think they will figure solutions towards this, Didi.
Yeah, I hope that is the case. But one last pain point that remains for, I guess, the audience, regarding the elongated race calendar that comes with that is, uh, I guess, the difference between F1's marketed growth strategy that they want to go into, spaces that they want to create new markets in the US and in places like China, in Southeast Asia. But at the same time, most of the deals they have struck over the last year, long-term deals they have struck are in the Middle East, which is where I guess the money is. So this has been a pain point for the audience because of the differentiation between what F1 has been saying they want to do and what they've actually done. So where do you see this going? Why is this happening, and where do you see this going in the future? Are we gonna ever go back to tracks like um, maybe Suzuka more often, or Singapore? Because and even Kota, even they haven't renewed their contract for this year. So or are these tracks gonna disappear over time?
I don't believe they'll disappear over time. I think Formula One will do what it takes to retain its glory of being racing in so many more countries than any other motorsport, and that's what also makes Formula One unique, right? And I would say it's a world, it's a commercial world they operate in. So if a sheikh lands up and says, "Hey, I want to be the last race of the season, and here's $40 million," I don't see why they shouldn't take the money from the sheikh, right? And at the same time, if there is a way that they can help the likes of a Hockenheim ring or a Nürburgring figure out deals where they sort of support each other and still host Formula One races, so be it. And then there is, of course, this model of the Miami Grand Prix where Formula One ends up being a promoter themselves. So I think Liberty Media doesn't get as much praise and as much applause as they should for finally putting frameworks in everything they do. And I know frameworks is certainly the buzzword for this episode, but truth be told, we all work in frameworks in our lives. So with Bernie, it was like I want to go race in Brazil, and he would find a deal in Brazil or something like that. But Liberty Media is saying we need more short dealings to secure the future of the sport. And I'm a big fan of how Liberty Media have sort of changed things around.
Yeah, same here. I
I
mean,
mean, uh, talking about tracks and the calendar and the composition of the calendar, basically, from your perspective, how likely is it that we will get a race in Africa, in Kyalami, most likely? And, when might it happen? Because Lewis Hamilton wants a race there. And frankly, Africa is the only continent without a race in Formula One, which is a global sport. So, I mean, just a side question, I guess. But how likely do you see it happening?
I mean, I hope there is a race that returns. Uh, there is a race that returns to South Africa, or in this case, Africa as a continent, since that's your question. And of course, there is this hope that it is back in 2023 and so on. And the truth is, so long as Formula One gets what they want, which is money, I'm sure they'll figure a way to fit in those 25 calendars in there. Their interest, much like anybody's interest, would be that we should have 30 promoters, waiting in line, and then we choose 25 of them. So, there is right now, or not right now, but a few years ago, the demand supply gap was reverse, right? The supply was little, and then the demand was too much, and they are of course working around to change that, where there is an excessive supply of races that happen, but it's then about making sure you choose the best that you can, or choose the best that they sort of give you in terms of some terms of money.
absolutely. And as much as we'd like to see a race in Africa, we'd also like to see a race in India. But talking about races in India, Formula E is finally coming to India. We'll finally have a home race, and I think that is the best news that I've heard this year. But the question does arise from that is, I guess switching our focus to motorsport in India, why hasn't obviously Formula One was in India between 2011 and 2013, but why haven't other racing series like maybe Asian Le Mans or Asian F3 and something more even regional series not come to India before? And why has it taken so long for them to tap into this market that is sitting there, which can be beneficial for both the audience and the promoters?
So the thing is, Formula One says there are 31 million fans in India, and I always wonder where are these fans, to be honest, because if there were 31 million fans, I think Star Sports would have figured a way to make money from these 31 million fans. It's unlikely to believe that a majority or more than a majority of these fans are streaming illegally and watching races. I don't believe that, right? So they are consuming it on Star Sports. So the truth is that the critical mass that follows Formula One in India is not as big enough for a broadcaster, for a series promoter, for infrastructure developers to make enough money from, right? And to give you a very rude example, if I had space, I would rather build a kabaddi auditorium and host kabaddi games, or the Pro Kabaddi League, than make a go-kart circuit, right? Because there is a league, there is a sport which is developing, there are people putting in money, Star is blowing it up, uh, and so on. But again, it's just a an example. So to my mind, it's motorsport is just not priority for India as a country, and it is priority for a very very small faction of Indians, I would say. And what will it take to change that priority? I think we have more societal priorities to sort of focus on than sporting priorities, without going into much depth. Otherwise, this will sound like a speech when I'm standing for the role of the prime minister of the country or something.
Talking about the Indian motorsport scene and that small fraction of people who are interested in motorsport, obviously we also have the Indian Formula Regional Series coming, and the Indian F4, along with the IAME X30 karting series. So obviously, this is going to have an impact on the Indian motorsport scene. But what are these series doing besides providing just a better platform and more opportunities for Indian racing drivers? What is the bigger picture that the audience should know about?
The bigger picture audience should know about is motorsport is fun, it's entertaining, and there is a lot of racing that actually happens in India as well. And India has a very now I'm getting political, but yeah, India has a very different relationship with sport, right? We are football fans, but we prefer to watch the EPL than the I League or the ISL. Now I know this is where viewers would tune in and say, "Hey, but I watch I League," and I'm sure Didi, you coming from the part of the world where I League is really big,
Yes.
would probably support that. But what I mean is the critical mass. There's always a critical mass. It's like you want to start you want to start making a new product. Say you're making a ballpoint pen, you know that you have to sell 10,000 pens a day for you to at least make some money, right? And that's the critical mass that I'm talking about. So the the critical mass is where I think sports has always faced a challenge. Non-cricketing sport, I would say, has always faced a challenge, which is again where motorsport fans would prefer to watch Formula One, Formula E, but not watch Indian racing as well. And the one thing that these series do show is there is great racing that happens. There are local names, local brands, local teams involved, all of them doing a great job. And that we should go out and cheer for them and support them because they are trying to exist in an environment which not necessarily is the most conducive for them to operate in, right? And of course, you can say it's a chicken and egg scenario. We don't have the best drivers because we don't have the best infrastructure, but the broadcast isn't the best, and so on. But there can be steps taken to cohesively build the infrastructure as well. Just that motorsport is so damn expensive as a sport, even when it comes to karting and so on. But yes, for everybody listening in from India, please go ahead and support your local team, support your local driver. They may not be a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen, but they are definitely bloody good to be competing at the Indian national level of motor racing as well.
Absolutely. But one aspect of this series, talking about support and how expensive the sport is, one aspect of the series that I would love to point out is that, someone starting the junior series being launched this year can make their way through to Asian F3 through sponsorship by Mumbai Falcons, who are organizing and are the promoters of the series. So, can we expect this merit-based sponsorship system to extend beyond Asian F3 in the coming future? Because it will be essential in providing the best opportunities to the best talent, in my opinion. And the system has been clearly very successful in IndyCar, and it remains a pain point for European Formula racing. And I think Mumbai Falcons, I think Arman Ibrahim did a interview recently with F1 Feeder Series, and he came out and said, we'll be in Europe sooner than later. And he's looking into expanding to not just single seater Formula racing, but also GT racing and endurance racing. So will these pathways open, and will we see a similar, ladder for people who are doing well in the Indian motorsport series, I guess?
I hope so. I really hope. Of course, I haven't read this interview of Arman's, but if Arman and Aditya are the ones saying these things, then I'm definitely sure that it's going to happen. They know their motorsport better than any one of us do. Uh, the only thing that is that I think Mumbai Falcons is doing fantastic to promote motor racing as they do. And see, there is always a business interest or a business model behind these scholarships. It's not charity, right? Uh, and I hope that Mumbai Falcons has a strong business model behind these scholarships that they're planning to work out on and all the promotions that they're doing. Because at the end of the day, if Mumbai Falcons is going to make money, they're going to keep pouring money into Indian motorsport. So I really hope that they have a very strong business model so that they can keep doing what they're doing and then keep building what they want to do within Europe as well. Because, eventually Europe is the place to be if one has to make it big in the world of motorsport.
Yeah, that is true. But now let's bring the conversation. Let's bring the focus of the conversation to you, Kunal. Let's talk about you and your journey in motorsport. What was it like, from completing a bachelor's of engineering in information technology to being the general manager of marketing and sponsorship at Force India Formula One team? It seems like you made the switch from engineering to marketing and talent management straight out of college. How did that come about? And how did the Kunal Shah of today, come about?
So, frankly speaking, it was, when I started racing, I, of course, spent more time trying to sell sponsorships because I needed the money to go racing than spend as much time as I would like in the racetrack. So then clearly by the end of it, I realized that, hey, I don't have a career driving race cars. Maybe I was good, maybe I wasn't. At least I think I was really great. So anyway, for anybody driving out there, please believe that you are really great. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. Your self belief has to be absolutely spot on. But yeah, on a more serious note, I always knew that I had a knack of understanding the business of sport. And so once I finished engineering, I decided that's the end of my engineering roadmap. I got the education, but I think like an athlete, and I think like, you know, to me, I always understand concepts when it based on how they would apply to the world of sport, right? And that's how I solve problems in life. I think like an athlete because I played professional sport for 12 years myself, right? So I knew that I had to get into the world of sports marketing and management, and I started selling sport. I started selling sponsorships for athletes, and one thing led to another. And then I got this call from a gentleman who was hiring captains for Vijay Mallya's personal charter jet. And he said he's looking for a head of marketing for his Formula One team. And I think he would like to have a chat with you. And I said, okay, wow, is this a spam call? That was my first reaction. But then one thing led to another. I had three rounds of interviews, and then my final meeting with him was at the 2010 Turkish Grand Prix. Um, it was actually, I think, that whole planning of the Grand Prix happened before I even had joined the team. So they knew I was going to join. So I was in Turkey and lots of interesting conversations. That's also where we put around the framework of the one from a billion hunt. So that's how it started. I spent 5 years with Force India, then spent a couple of years with Star Sports with the Pro Kabaddi League. That's why I could give examples about the Kabaddi League as well. And then I said, okay, after 12 years of working, I wanted to take a break. So I went back, studied, and now I'm working as the Vox chef or the broadcast editor or broadcast director. I don't know what the English translation of
The
that is, to
broadcast
be
guru.
honest. No, I'm far from being a guru. I'm still a chela of a lot of people. But the so we did, that's just how I ended up doing what I do with Via Sport, and I love it because it's not like being it's doing television journalism. So I get to write, I get to speak with lovely guys as you, and then I get to work with a team of commentators broadcasting official Formula One.
That's really awesome. I think there's a lot of people out there who would love to be involved in Formula One, whether that's through whether that's working in Formula One or even through a couple of degrees of separation, if you want to put it that way. But talking about the one from a billion hunt, you obviously organized that yourself. You were leading that, and you must be really proud to see both Jihan Darula and Arjun Mani do so well for themselves. What is it that stood out about them all those years ago that made you go, they are the ones? And what is it about them that has helped them to succeed in this overly competitive sport? And alongside that, I would also, if you could shed some light on to what goes on behind the scenes to organize something on such a huge scale.
Absolutely. So first thing, Jihan and Arjun, the one thing that really set them apart was talent. They were incredibly talented, and they still are incredibly talented. There was also another driver called Parth Gorpade, very, very talented. Just that by the time we caught him, he was a little too uh, old for the world of motorsport to try and help him make some corrections and help him grow through the ranks. So Parth was incredibly talented, and of course the age gap between Jehan and Parth was almost 7 years at that time, right? So It was always about, catch them young and watch them grow, as they call it. So when it comes to Arjun and Jehan, I remember Arjun still has one of the smoothest racing, uh, you know, behavior behind the steering wheel. He was so smooth with his steering inputs and braking. It's still a joy to watch him race. And Jehan, of course, I think Jehan was. Jihan worked harder through the course of how it was. And when I say worked harder, I don't mean that the others didn't. I just think that sometimes, it's like all if all three of us were to put 10 on 10 at work, we still bring in different aptitudes of how we
Yep.
put in on that effort, and that's where Jihan's progression through the first season that we ran him in the British Karting Championship was phenomenal. And anyway, that's how it all started. And then to your second part of your question, organizing the one from a billion hunt. Wow, that was fantastic. It was so much fun. I had organized something called as a war room within our team, where I had a representative from each team that was working directly with me. So there was media and PR, there was on-ground operations, and there was sporting operations and technical operations and marketing and sponsorship. And we had Mobile One as one of our sponsors. And I think eventually there was about 200, 250 people who were putting together the entire, one from a billion hunt, right from the go-karts to the tires to what fuel we'll use and how we made sure that the carts were equal to the registration to training people when there were so many people who sat in a go-kart for the very first time in their life, for example. We were involved in pretty much everything, and I had pretty much. It's definitely one of the best projects I've ever worked with because I was able to personally be involved with all aspects of it, and yeah, it was a massive dream. I really wish that we had a second and a third and a fourth season of that as well. But for reasons outside of anybody else's control, we had to contend with doing just one season of the one from a billion hunt.
I mean, I remember, being in boarding school. That was my first year there, and reading about the one in a billion hunt. And that was it was around, when the Indian GPs were happening, and it was heartbreaking to not be able to attend, one of these events and see for myself as to what it was all about. And obviously, Vedant was there with me too. Although we learned about each other's love for F1 a lot later in high school, and were taken by surprise. But yeah, hopefully in the future, with what Mumbai Falcons are doing, we'll have another opportunity. Kunal, this has been an enthralling conversation. But before you let you go, I have one last question for you. A lot of people want to be involved in motorsport, not just professionally, but even through a hobby or something. But a lot of people struggle to find opportunities. What are some of the different ways people could participate in this passion or love, the love that they have for the sport, as more than just a viewer? And for those especially who are trying to aspire and be a part of this industry, what is it that they need to do? What is a piece of advice that you would give them?
First and foremost, I would say it's fantastic that people want to try and work in motorsport. I get a lot of queries myself, and my one of the reasons why I'm really pleased to get these queries is because there's never a shortage of fun work to do. There's never a shortage of smart people, fun people to collaborate with, right? And the one thing you should do, and when I say you, of course, I'm now addressing, the listeners at large, is identify what is the one or two things that you are really good at and want to do. And I really mean one or two really, things to good at. I know so many people who want to contribute to motorsport and they are volunteer marshals. And I think that in itself is fantastic. To give an example, you are so directly involved in hosting a motorsport series. And hey, what more joy than actually helping series happen, right? And of course, if you want to drive, there are scholarships available. You mentioned Mumbai Falcons, and that's probably the best place to be right now. If you want to get trained in go karts, I would say going to Rayo Racing is definitely the easiest answer to, hey, how do I get trained in go karts? If you want to be a journalist, start your blog, start a podcast, start tweeting about it, pick a social media handle that you want, and then make a plan. Try and find where, what's your USP, and There are so many people I speak to that actually have ended up doing that. Somebody I spoke to, great at understanding data. He started pulling out all the data sheets of races and started making his own graphs. And people love seeing his graphs now. So again, he's doing it for fun. Um, there are people I know who said, "Hey, I'm great at statistics. I'm great at seeing a race and trying to find some odds or trying to find some peculiar movements that happen, and they write statistics about motor racing." So the point is there is always scope, and there are always, very importantly, people who will help you along the way. So if you realize, for example, I want to start a podcast, reach out to people who already have a podcast, like you guys, like me. Ask, simple things. Do I need a mic? Where do I host my podcast? How do I record it? And so on. And I know that the world is a much open space than it's ever been before, and it is only getting more and more open with regards to helping each other. So, if I can be of any help to anybody listening in, just reach out to me via Twitter or yeah, I think Twitter is the best place. My DMs are open, and then we'll be very happy to be of help in any way as I can be.
Thank you, Kunal. Obviously, we'll put Kunal's Twitter handle in the description below. Kunal, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I hope we can have another conversation in the future. Obviously, we are available anytime to talk about motorsport, regardless of where or when it is. But I can't thank you enough for coming onto the show and for supporting us even prior to for when we started all of this work a year and a half ago. So thank you for that. And Vedant, before I wrap up this podcast, one last thought from you, like always.
Yeah. I mean, I guess firstly, thank you, Kunal, so much for joining us and giving us your insights because, from listening from someone within the sport who has been a part of the sport for so long, it's always eye opening. And we always find, and we did find a lot of, different perspectives to look at things. But I guess in the end, as Divya said during the start of the podcast, this is the most exciting time for motorsports, and because we have a lot of new regulations coming in, new lot of young drivers coming in, and especially for Indian motorsports, we have Jehan and Prema in Formula 2, and we have Formula E in Hyderabad coming in, and we have the Formula regionals coming in India. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess it's so exciting to get involved in motorsports at such a level at a podcast right now. And yeah, thank you for your support, Kunal, as well from the beginning, as Divya said.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be talking Formula One and motorsport to you guys, and it will be my pleasure to join you anytime in the coming future as well. And wish you guys all the best. I think the name of the channel is pretty fantastic. It's got a very international plus an Indian feel to it. So thank you for inviting me to your Baithak and offering chai at the very start.
It was our pleasure, Kunal. It was our pleasure. Thank you for joining us once again. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll catch you on the next one.